Hi, everyone. Welcome back to today's episode of the Healthy Shift Worker podcast. And I'm really excited about today's episode because we're going to be talking around the topic of heliotherapy, light, and nutrition with Zaid Dahhaj. Now, Zahid is a men's health coach who is based all the way over in Southern California, a long way from me here in Australia. And has a comprehensive circadian-friendly approach to helping people deliver a healthier relationship with their well-being. And interestingly enough, he's also the founder of a podcast titled the 2 a.m. podcast, which I thought was very appropriate for with mine here at the Healthy Shift Worker. But he's worked with hundreds of men since his father passed away of heart disease in 2015. And he's on a mission to bring important biological concepts, especially in relation to light, to the world. So welcome to the show, Zaid. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you, Audra. I'm very excited to be on and discuss some of these, some controversial topics, some not controversial, but regardless, I think it's going to be educational for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I guess before we get into the nitty-gritty of things, I mean, I'm really looking forward to our chat purely because shift workers, as I'm sure you're going to be able to appreciate, are very light deficient. And when I mean light deficient, as in deficient of sunlight, and also they experience light toxicity as a result of being stuck under so much artificial light 24/7. So I'm really excited to sort of talk to you about this because obviously it has a lot of health implications. But before we dive in, could you share a little bit about yourself, like what started you on your journey to I know a lot of it is self-taught, but your knowledge is really truly blows me away. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that, your background.
Sure thing. So you know, I've always been an athlete at heart. I've played competitive soccer or football for the European and international parties. You know, I've played competitive soccer at a high level since I started at age 4, about that time frame. I've went all the way until 25, really stopped playing at 26 or so, but that is one part of the reason why I've been interested in health for the most part. And then, of course, as you alluded to in the intro, my father's passing was a huge influence on me. I think that heart disease being the leading global killer, that's definitely influenced me in a way where I wanted to actually have some understanding around all of these health subjects so that I wouldn't fall into the same category of mortality, so to speak. So that's been a big inspiration for me. And then that's led itself to working with men one-on-one, everything from light environment to circadian biology to supplementation to blood work. I mean, I'm very obsessed. I'm a very obsessive personality, so I like to cover as much of the work as possible. And I like to be as detail-oriented as possible. So that's really what brought me here.
Yeah, fascinating. And I love that you're actually sitting outside in the light, in the natural sunlight while we're doing this podcast. But can you explain to our listeners what is heliotherapy? Because I know it's certainly not a term that is that we hear in mainstream very often.
Yeah, so it's very simple. Heliotherapy is just in reference to sun therapy. So there is a specific method or framework that you can use in order to facilitate the healing of patients or just the overall optimization of health in order to gain better outcomes. And what's interesting enough with heliotherapy and what I found through my research is that it was a key part of centralized medicine's approach to helping patients heal in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and really through the work of some key figures in that past discussion. I think that it's very helpful to understand that aspect of history, because then we can look towards the present moment and towards the future in terms of like understanding where we are in our understanding of health. But yeah, I think a large part of medicine today, centralized medicine, has lost touch with heliotherapy, considering that we've practiced it in the past. But and it's honestly a shame, in my opinion, because I mean it's one of the most valuable tools that we can use in order to help people heal. So
yeah. And in saying that too, I have to say that it was when I stumbled across an article on your website, and I think it was titled "The Lost Wisdom of Heliotherapy," and it included images of hospitals where people were there, all the patients were outside in the sunlight. So yeah, it looked like the photos obviously looked quite old. They looked like, I'm guessing, around 100 years ago, but it truly was, they were profound images that you couldn't sort of go, like, not want to kind of learn more what's going on there.
Yeah, and it completely goes against the centralized orthodoxy of today, which is that, the sun obviously causes sun cancer. So why would we sunbathe our patients in order to see better outcomes? It's like, it's the one thing that I point to in order to get people to understand that maybe they haven't been told the truth. Maybe there's been some corruption in the equation. Maybe profit motive is a huge incentive for these big companies and key figures. And that's something that I'm trying to bring to light for other people, especially those who don't know about this stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So what were some of the things that you discovered on, I guess, early on in the journey? Like, were you kind of questioning what specific conditions were these doctors treating? Like, what sort of set you on that that path to go, okay, they are really healing?
Yeah. I've always been interested, well, not always, but within the past couple of years, I've been really interested in light, circadian biology, a lot of the things that some key influencers in the health space are starting to discuss. But as a natural result of going down that rabbit hole, I've just started to look into the past to see how we actually approach sunlight, because of course we know that many cultures, many religions held the sun in high regard. And so if we understand that, and then we add on the layer of centralized medicine using this type of heliotherapy in the past, then I think that it really is, it offers us a huge opportunity today. And it allows us to throw away some misconceptions that are seriously hurting people's lives and health. And so another example of something I found in the past is, sunbathing babies from the 1931 Department of Labor Child's Bureau recommendations. And what astonished me about that is that they actually lay out a perfectly balanced way to sunbathe your babies properly without any of the negatives associated with like sunburning, anything of that nature. And so if you look at heliotherapy, a lot of it is the battle against tuberculosis, the battle against respiratory diseases. Rickets was a huge one, which is mainly what facilitated the research into heliotherapy. And so I think there's a broad range of things that we can tackle with sun therapy, and really we just have to understand how to properly use it with the right framework.
Yeah, exactly. Because obviously, if you're baking out there for hours on at a time on a beach, you're going to kind of burn. But I think at the end of the day, though, sunlight, I think we need to appreciate is that it's not just about vitamin D, because I think that's what we keep hearing in that space is that we do need a certain amount of sunlight from vitamin D. But so what else does sunlight, how does it, because there's lots of different colors and frequencies and so forth.
Yeah. Well, vitamin D is the big part of the discussion. We also have to consider the POMC gene, pro-opiomelanocortin gene, which is found in every mammal, so every human being. This gene interacts directly with light in order to set our circadian rhythm. And the interesting thing about this is that, first of all, centralized medicine has known about this gene. They've created drugs around trying to manipulate things like leptin and other peptides that are cleaved off of the POMC gene, stimulated by natural light. You could talk about nitric oxide. You could talk about the fact that the higher you move from the equator, the more incidences of breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, really all forms of cancer you see. And so I think it's just, people are so stuck within the vitamin D rabbit hole, but they're not broadening their perspective to all of these other biological mechanisms that are involved. And we can get into how the mitochondria work, how basically you have non-visual photoreceptors in the eye, the brain, the fat, the skin. There's a lot to cover here, but essentially what I'm referring to is that we evolved to work with the sun, we evolved under the sun, and every part of our biology is designed to get natural light.
Yeah, fascinating. Now, obviously my ears prick up when you've mentioned about all of those, but the nitric oxide, can you explain to our listeners how that kind of works? So because shift workers also are quite prone to having hypertension or high blood pressure.
Yeah, this is actually something I've written about. And so nitric oxide is stimulated by UVA specifically. So UVA, UVB start to creep around, I'd say 10, 11 a.m., depending on your latitude and location.
Mm.
But essentially, when UVA hits the skin, it stimulates a form of nitric oxide in the skin, and then that lends itself to a form of nitric oxide that is formed in the blood vessels. And as a result, especially with hypertension, then we have a really powerful way to reduce blood pressure naturally. Now, I'm not going to say that it's going to reduce blood pressure in all cases. I think that there's a lot of nuance in this discussion, but regardless, I think that there's a lot of research to show that UVA stimulating nitric oxide in the skin and then the blood vessels is extremely powerful for overall health, especially for shift workers.
Mm. So even if we think of bring into the common sense equation, it does make sense, doesn't it? If you're spending all of your time inside, then and particularly when you're being drowned in artificial light, that maybe that's possibly one of the consequences of other melanomas, or I don't know. There's not much research out there, but that's just something to consider. That because of the different types of frequencies. Now you mentioned UVA and UVB. What other frequencies are there, and what time of the day? So what happens at sunrise? What happens at mid-morning? That kind of a thing.
Sure. So we'll start from the top, sunrise. Sunrise to about 8 or 9 a.m. Again, it depends on latitude, but during that time, I really view that time as sacred because that's when you'll find a lot of red, near infrared, far infrared light from the sun, due to something called the Rayleigh scattering phenomenon, which essentially just refers to how the sun's light interacts with the atmosphere to then concentrate the red light spectrum as opposed to blue and other light waves. This is a time of rejuvenation in my mind. I think if we are to take advantage of the sun's power, then we have to start with sunrise. And it makes sense because from an evolutionary perspective, we got sunrise and the morning sun on our bare skin before we got UVA and UVB. So this is a huge part of the discussion for me because, and we can discuss this later, it's also a great way to avoid burning. But so that's the morning time, very powerful for people. Then you have middays. So that's where we focus on UVA, UVB. This is where, like I mentioned, UVA stimulates nitric oxide. UVB, interestingly enough, is where you is the only place where you actually produce vitamin D3 via sulfated cholesterol. So, supplementation is one other discussion. But if we're talking about getting vitamin D3 in the most wholesome and holistic way possible, it has to be during midday sunbathing. And then there are other things as well. I mean, POMC stimulation from UVA, UVB is extremely powerful. And then heading towards the evening time is when you see a lot of the same benefits associated with the morning, except it's more about really relaxing your way into the evening so that you get the best sleep from a circadian perspective. So all of these things work together: morning, midday, and then evening. All of these blend in a perfect symphony, and the sun is designed to give you all of the beneficial wavelengths according to each time frame there.
Now you mentioned with sunbathing for the vitamin D3, are you saying that people best to be in water at the same time as being in sunlight? Or
I'm a big fan of ocean swims, but sunbathing specifically, like just laying out and getting most of your skin in the game during mid.
Okay. All right. Sorry. I thought you meant in the water surfing or something like that.
I love ocean swims though. They're extremely beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. All right. Now POMC is definitely a new term that even myself only sort of really heard about, I don't know, a few months ago. I'd love for you to, and I know that has a correlation with weight loss. Can you maybe break that down into a little bit of, I guess, layman's terms to our listeners to understand when it comes to weight loss, because there's obviously a big focus on nutrition and movement, which is all very relevant. But as you say, it's kind of a little bit of a missing link when it comes to helping with weight loss.
Yeah. So before I get into this discussion, nutrition, training, sleep, these are all important things. I like by no means am I discounting any of them. But my my philosophy is that sunlight is actually an extremely powerful way in order to facilitate weight loss and other health outcomes. So when we talk about POMC, I'll try to explain this as simply as possible, but pro-opiomelanocortin, so we have a POMC gene. This POMC gene gets stimulated by light. It then creates the protein associated with POMC, which is also pro-opiomelanocortin. And then as a result of that, it cleaves off or cuts off biological peptides that are extremely powerful. So there's probably more than 8 to 10, but these are the ones that we know of so far. So you have beta endorphin, which is an opioid peptide, extremely powerful for pain, extremely powerful for those feelings of well-being. This is why we're biologically driven to be under the sun and seek it. Then you have alpha, beta, gamma melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH, and this is where you actually produce melanin from the sun. And then there's a whole range of anti-inflammatory, antioxidant benefits from the various forms of MSH. What else do you have? You have CART. These are abbreviations, CART, and then ACTH. The most interesting thing that people need to know about all of these peptides is that they're appetite suppressants. So if we're talking about weight loss, if we're talking about reducing visceral fat and really getting ourselves to a healthy metabolic state, then we really need to explore how these peptides interact with sunlight and artificial light as well. Because not only do you have to have the daytime in check, I really do think that you have to have the nighttime in check as well, the light and dark cycle.
Fascinating, because again, the sleep disruption for our shift working audience stimulates that ghrelin and suppresses the leptin, and the appetite regulation is certainly very difficult. But I love that you're shining the light, pardon the pun, on the opportunity to think of another way to help with that appetite regulation. And so okay, great. So and correct me if I've missed it yet, but can you I guess tie in the leptin link with the light?
Yes. So leptin is also one of those peptides that's stimulated from POMC. That starts from direct sunlight.
Yep.
There's been a lot of coverage on leptin. There's been a lot of research, and we understand that it has a lot of benefits. But when you take a look at people who are circadianly misaligned, shift workers are probably the perfect example of that. Then you start to get into an area where people become leptin resistant because they have so much leptin flowing through their bodies, mainly in the brain. Because in my opinion, through my research, it all starts in the brain. So if you do become leptin resistant, then some serious downstream consequences occur, such as weight gain, obesity at its extreme, autoimmune issues. It really does touch a lot of different things. And this is all independent of food. This is all how light interacts with your metabolism and biology at a fundamental level.
Yeah. So, okay. So on that nutshell, on that statement that you've just said, we can eat really well, like eat the most nutritious, amazing, food, a cross section of proteins and healthy fats and fruits and vegetables. But are you alluding to the fact that if we're not spending enough outside time in the sunlight to get those UVA, UVB infrareds, then we're not getting the real bang from our buck when it comes to our food?
Yes, absolutely. So I've always been of the philosophy that you need to combine optimizing food and then light and circadian biology, because they go in the same bucket. You need to optimize those two things simultaneously. Because I've experimented with optimizing food and then having misaligned circadian biology. I've done vice versa, and the results aren't as good as when you have both of them together as one unit. And this makes sense when you look at the peptides from POMC as well, because I believe ACTH stimulates cortisol. Cortisol interacts with blood sugar very tightly. So, there's a lot of biological mechanisms that are involved with metabolism, and it can get pretty complex. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we facilitate both nutrition and light together.
Absolutely, yeah. Which can be a little bit tricky with what our audience does, obviously. But it's having that that knowledge to have that awareness to be able to do the best that they can under the circumstances around the shifts that they've got going. Now, you mentioned a word before, melanin. I'd love for you to share to our readers exactly what that is. Also, melanopsin as well. Maybe you can touch on both.
Yeah. So melanin is fascinating. It's just a natural polymer found in nature. It's been conserved for 650 plus million years. It's found all throughout nature. I mean, obviously, we have it in our skin. We actually have three different forms of melanin. You have neuromelanin, which is found in the brain, eumelanin, which is responsible for the blacks and browns in nature. That's why, for example, I would tan in a more brownish kind of caramel color. And then somebody who's lighter skinned has more pheomelanin, which is a third, which is responsible for the reds, yellows, oranges, pinks. And that's why typically you see if someone who's lighter skinned tans, they have more of a reddish type of pinkish adaptation to their tan as opposed to someone who's darker skinned. So first of all, being conserved for 650 million plus years, I mean, this is some serious stuff here. So it's very important to understand. Melanin has an incredible array of health benefits. I mean, it's an antioxidant. It's radioprotective, meaning it protects from radiation. It blocks 99% of UV, which is an interesting fact going into the sunbathing and building the solar callus. It's anti-inflammatory. It's been shown to actually detoxify heavy metals in a safe manner through the skin. It can bind to heavy metal ions. So it has such an incredible array of benefits, and I don't think most people are focused on those benefits. I think they just think of melanin as skin pigmentation, but in reality, I think it's an absolute powerhouse.
Yeah, definitely. And we've also been told to protect our skin from the sun. I mean, I remember countless times growing up, I'd go outside. I did live somewhere that was quite hot. I'd go outside to hang out in the washing, and my mum would rouse on me because I wasn't wearing a hat, or she was trying desperately to cover me up. So yeah, which I think is why I've got fairly pale skin now, but I'm working on that, being out in the sun a bit more, near the beach. But okay. So you mentioned the melanin, and you also touched on a word there, the solar plexus.
Or solar callus.
Sorry, solar callus, beg your pardon.
Yeah, solar callus is so if we're talking about one of the most misunderstood things out there, solar callus is definitely at the top of the list. A lot of the practitioners, the dermatologists, ophthalmologists, they don't actually believe in the concept of a solar callus because from their worldview, they think that sunlight causes skin cancer, and so there's no such thing as a solar callus. But what we're referring to with it is just a tan. So we're referring to an adaptation, a human biological adaptation that is stimulated from the proper approach to sunlight. And once you have the proper framework and you have enough melanin in your system through your skin, then you're able to withstand a lot more sun exposure. And like I mentioned, UV or melanin blocks 99% of all UV. It's an extraordinarily powerful sun protector. And really, like I said, with the framework, there's a right and a wrong way to approach your solar callus. So the wrong way is to stay inside all day, and then once summer comes around, then you go to the beach and you spend 2, 3, 4, 5 hours exposing yourself to the sun.
Yeah.
Especially if you have light skin, that is a recipe for burns. That's a recipe for melanoma, in my opinion, for other reasons. But I think the most important part of this discussion is that we actually sunbathe in the early AM time in order to prime and protect our skin so that we can take advantage of the high UVA, UVB midday sunbathing. So going back to the red and near infrared light, that actually stimulates something called filigrin, which hydrates and protects the skin. And then it also stimulates something called uracanic acid, which is also protective of the skin. So if somebody, I'll take a lighter skinned person, for example, if they were to sunbathe religiously in the morning time for at least 20 to 30 minutes and then go to sunbathe midday, then they'd notice that their burns are completely gone for the most part.
Yeah. So I like that approach. It's obviously a very, which makes sense, just to start out gently as opposed to going full. And the other way, it's so many, if we look at people that are in their offices or call centers or hospitals or wherever it is, they're in there all day and night, and then on their days off, even before, if we think about holidays, even on their days off, they go, right, I'm out of here, I'm going to the beach. And then they go out there in the middle of the day and then they get burnt. And so then there's this panic of, oh my gosh, the sun is bad. But I like the way that you've articulated that. It's like prepping yourself, isn't it, for sun exposure?
Yeah, the best way that I've found to get this idea across to people is that if you're a beginner in the gym, if you've never trained a day in your life and you're looking to lift some weight in order to gain muscle, you don't go into the gym and approach a barbell that has 250 pounds on it and try to lift that. So in the same way that you develop that adaptation through progressive overload, which the fitness industry uses for people to get stronger without any of the negative side effects, in the form of injury, that's the same lens that I want people to approach sunlight.
Brilliant analogy. Yeah, absolutely. We're not kind of taught that at all, are we? It's just again, yeah, we're taught to sort of just cover up for that type of thing. All right. So the other question that I wanted to talk about, I suppose, is in the realms of light toxicity. So we've talked about light deficiency and ways of getting. Actually, before we do that, how about the people that are, say, living in the UK or living in Canada or Alaska that don't actually have the beautiful sun-drenched and blue sky that you're sitting in right now? If they go outside and they are having to cover up and it is cold, are they getting any benefits from that?
They're going to get minimal benefits. I think there's a lot to that discussion, but if we're looking at the UK, Scandinavian countries, I think are a perfect example. You're looking at an environment that has a lower solar yield. So as a result, like I said, there's a lot of nuance. But if you're looking at like someone who evolved in an equatorial environment and they go to live in the UK, I don't think that works out in the long run. I do actually think that those type of people have to move to a more equatorial friendly location in order to gain the benefits of sunlight and really the biological benefits that they're evolved to get. But there are ways around darker environments. I think the Scandinavian countries have really figured this out perfectly. So for example, you'll see that they take advantage of cold. Obviously, they're in a cold environment, and cold has a lot of great benefits, including and through some of the work that I've found, cold actually allows you to maintain melanin. I've seen some work through Dr. Jack Kruse that he poses that you actually produce a low form of UVC light from your cells based off of cold exposure. So that's an interesting perspective. But also you have other things like being exposed to geothermal pools, red light saunas, things of that nature, where they can take advantage of the beneficial red light spectrum in order to really maintain health. And then you have, outside of that, I think maintaining darkness is a key part of the discussion for people who are more adapted to that area. Because what's interesting is that through darkness, the vitamin D receptor is tied to melatonin. So if you use more darkness, then you're able to use more vitamin D if you have it at your disposal. So those are just a few of the things that come to mind when it comes to people who live in more darker environments.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. I haven't heard of that sort of correlation before. But you are sort of saying that it would still be beneficial even if it was a cloudy day for them, just to take a break from their workplace, just to get outside, and even being under cloud cover, they are getting some benefits from the sun.
Yeah, without a doubt. I think at the end of the day, regardless of weather conditions, if you get outside, you're still going to get a lot of the full light spectrum. You won't get as much UVA and UVB, but you're still getting the beneficial effects of blue light, which interacts with melanopsin, which is a blue light sensor. You're still getting a little bit of the red light spectrum, probably not much depending on weather. But then, like I said, you're getting all of the other beneficial wavelengths packaged together.
And what's that versus sitting next to a window?
Yeah. So this is a very fascinating discussion. Windows will artificially manipulate the full light spectrum in harmful ways. And this is why I really view windows, sunglasses, contact lenses, sunscreen, and clothes in the same perspective, because all of them interact with the full light spectrum and artificially manipulate them to then cause some harms to to our biology. And so if you're looking at a window, it blocks a substantial amount of the UVA. I believe it blocks all of the UVB, blocks 30 to 60% of the red light spectrum altogether. And then what's particularly damaging is that it concentrates the blue light wavelengths. So from that perspective, you're essentially becoming blue light toxic through manipulation that glass has on light.
Wow. So they're getting they're getting a double whammy if they're sitting or potentially sitting by a window and then getting it from up above. Yeah.
Yeah, they're just getting the worst part of the spectrum.
Wow. Wow. Gosh. I guess, and that leads us into, that discussion around light toxicity, and I suppose making people aware of it again. I don't think, because the whole light medicine, circadian biology, it's familiar to us, but I know that it's not mainstream for a lot of people to grasp that understanding. What advice do you recommend for people that are stuck indoors under that artificial light, sometimes also sitting in front of 4 computer screens and maybe got their mobile phone nearby? Like, what can they do? And I guess, firstly, sorry, there's 2 parts to that question. What is actually happening when they are drowning under that much artificial light, and what steps could they do to help to kind of mitigate it realistically?
Yeah, so if first of all, I'd like to say that there's a lot you can do. So nobody's hopeless. There's a lot of specific techniques and strategies that you can use to take advantage of the full light spectrum, avoid artificial light, which is just blue isolated light. From the biological perspective, artificial light is extremely damaging to every aspect of our body, in my opinion. I think we have research showing that it damages the brain, it damages the eyes, it could lead to myopia, macular degeneration, things of that nature. It damages the skin, which is an important part of, again, the skin cancer discussion, tolerance to sunlight. And then it influences metabolism in a negative way because, again, through those peptides stimulated by POMC, there's some discussion that artificial blue light might actually stimulate ACTH and CART in order to raise cortisol and then blood sugar independent of food. So this is a very deep rabbit hole, and it's fascinating. But if, from a practical perspective, simply opening your windows is a huge start. I mean, even opening it a little bit will allow the full light spectrum into your indoor environment. And this is because of how light works at the quantum level. It can act as both a particle and a wave, so it's able to bounce and scatter throughout your environment. Getting a pair of dark lens blue light blockers is a really fantastic strategy from my experience, especially if you're using tech or anything of that nature. Dimming the lights, turning off the lights, getting some more full spectrum bulbs. I think those are very helpful things as well. And then, of course, taking like outside breaks, going for a walk.
Yeah.
A lot of these things are very simple, but I think the complexity of the biological mechanisms throws people off. So I think I want people to focus more on the simple strategies, which those are some.
So you're suggesting blue light blockers even during the daytime, and maybe if they're on night shift, or different colored lenses? Because obviously we know that one of them can actually make us tired and sleepy.
Yeah, which is a very interesting idea because I actually have a friend who's a doctor. We actually had him on recently for the podcast as a guest, and he mentioned that he doesn't like to wear blue light blockers when he's working in the hospital because, like you said, it brings him into a drowsy state. It's more associated with bedtime. So you don't have to go down the blue light blocker route. If you're using technology inside, you can get a red light filter on your iPhone. You can install something called Flux, F.lux on your computer. You can get Iris, which is another piece of technology on the computer. So there's a lot you can do from that perspective. And then, I think the tricky thing with being indoors, especially for shift workers, is that they're constantly bombarded with artificial light. But what they can do, I think, is just start the morning time exposed to some sunlight, take frequent breaks. If they're on calls, go outside. When you're eating your meal, go outside. Because what I've noticed is that the more sunlight exposure that you get, you're kind of more resilient against artificial light exposure. So I think that's something that's very helpful for people.
Another preventative strategy. Yeah, it is what it is. The lighting system. I mean, the lighting system needs to be over. I think a massive overhaul in our hospitals. It's another area of discussion. That's for sure. But yeah, I think I remember. I mean, my background's in aviation, being at the airport, and one of our lunchrooms was always sort of inside the airport area, and I used to always crave wanting to go, just intuitively wanting to go and sit outside in the sunshine as opposed to sitting in the lunchroom that didn't have any windows. And it's just interesting because back then I didn't have that knowledge of the whole light medicine and circadian biology that I do today. But it's interesting that the body intuitively knew what it needed to do, couldn't at that time. But I guess it's a shouting out to those that are listening that do have the opportunity, particularly in hospitals. It's easy to really go outside. There's always areas outside to sit, to have your lunch break, because if the patients have it and the people that visit the patients. I think if it just obviously involves, because there is that time, you're on that designated meal break time, and you've only got so much time to be there and back and eat. But I guess if there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always a solution to these kind of things. It's I can understand that it is tough for a lot of people, especially in the healthcare field. I mean that's it's with shift work particularly, I think it's a shame because people aren't, I mean, the very medical professionals that we are supposed to look up to, for the most part, I'm generalizing, they don't understand any of these things around circadian biology.
Yeah.
And so I think that education and that curiosity is really a key component to all of this.
Absolutely. And we'll be sparking this discussion. So if you were to give three, I'm just mindful of the time here, but so we'll probably look at wrapping up shortly. But if you were to give three practical tips, if you were a shift worker, whether they were a rotating shift worker, whether they're a night shifter, what would those three absolutely non-negotiable things that you would be doing if you were a shift worker, and to recommend to our audience?
Number one, most definitely take advantage of the early AM sunlight. Full body exposure, as much of your skin in the game as possible. That is such a huge part of the discussion because that's what really sets the circadian rhythm. It's one of the most powerful, what we call Zeitgebers, which is a circadian timer. So morning sunlight, I think number two might be a little bit interesting perspective from my end, but definitely if you are outside as a shift worker, don't wear sunglasses. If you have contact lenses and you can't see that much, then go for reading glasses so that you're able to bring them down from eye level to get that full light spectrum in. That's a big one because sunglasses and like I said, with the artificial manipulation of light, that's a huge problem in my opinion. Makes people more susceptible to burning. And then last one, I'd probably say take advantage of naps. I think naps for shift workers are obviously huge. So getting more sleep in general is just a better idea.
Yeah, strategically timed nap.
Yeah, keep them at like 20 minutes max. Do them between 12 p.m., so noon, all the way to like 3 p.m. latest.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, yeah, great advice. So even people like myself who wear glasses that obviously have that blue light protector, you're recommending to even remove those as well as the sunglasses?
I mean, like if they're reading glasses and you need them for like if they're prescription, then I don't want you to put yourself in harm's way, obviously, when driving or doing any other activity. But if you're outside and you're sunbathing, for example, or you're just watching sunrise or sunset, just take them off. You don't really need them. And then also the eye regeneration benefits of the red light spectrum are incredible. I mean, there's a lot of scientific evidence on that. So, yeah.
Yeah, they're really, great tips, Zed. And I think the morning sunlight thing is such a huge one as well, when you're touching on the whole circadian biology side of recalibrating those circadian clocks, that they need a reset, particularly after they've been doing like lots of night shifts and their whole body clock is completely out of whack. And it's just trying to get back to how we're supposed to be as diurnal creatures and not nocturnal, even though we are. And that I'm sure we could just do a whole podcast just talking about circadian clocks and circadian biology, and helping to understand the benefits of getting that sun exposure. And what I absolutely love is that the sun's free.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of these transformative health foundations, they're absolutely free, whether it's cold exposure, sleep, sunlight exposure, making your environment more dark after sunset. I mean, a lot of this stuff costs $0, so
Yeah.
you can't afford that.
Yeah, which is exciting, and I think empowering for people to understand that it's like, I can actually improve my health and well-being. It doesn't have to cost me a fortune, and just baby steps as well. So yeah, well, look, this has been a fantastic discussion, Zed. I've really enjoyed hearing what you've got to share, and you're certainly opening again the light, shining the light on such a great topic that I truly do believe is going to gain more and more traction moving forward in regards to circadian health and light medicine, once that gets I guess gets more and more public awareness around it. But is there anything else that you wanted to add just before something that you think that would be valuable for people to understand that I maybe haven't asked in the question?
Yeah, one thing comes to mind, again, with the going back to the morning sunlight exposure, the reason why I'm so big on getting your eyes and skin in the game at that time is, first of all, like all aromatic amino acids are actually stimulated from morning sunlight. So if we're talking about mental health, which I know is a huge discussion among shift workers, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, all of these neurotransmitters are stimulated from the byproducts of what's created from morning sunlight. So you can talk about tryptophan, phenylalanine, all of these various aromatic amino acids are designed to absorb UV and the red light spectrum. And so that's able to really get your mental health in check. So especially if you can watch sunrise and then get as much of the sunbathing in the early AM time, that's a huge advantage for shift workers particularly.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. And now when I just thought of that is that why aren't consultations held outside?
That's a great point. That's something I've never even thought of too. So there's all sorts of creative ways that we can find ourselves, more in aligned with circadian biology to then get better results. So I love that.
Yeah, thought about it then. Well, well, thank you so very much for being on the show, Zayed. I know that you've got a great a newsletter that's titled Holistic Medicine for Men. But and I'd love for everybody also to go onto your website and read that article that I quoted. What was the name of it again? I'm sorry, I'll just have to, The Lost Wisdom of Heliotherapy. I'd love for everybody to actually read and see the images that you shared of these hospitals with the patients out in the sun. So, but where could they get in touch with you? You've got a website, obviously, you're on social media.
Yeah, so Zaid Dahhaj, ZaidKDahhaj. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter. The website is that as well. And a lot of this also applies to women. So I just put that name a while back just because I mainly work with men. But this is biology. It applies to everybody. But that's mainly where you can find me. And then lastly, of course, the 2 a.m. podcasts. We have a lot of fun discussions, some on health, some just general other stuff. But that's where you can find me.
Brilliant. Excellent. Out of interest, where did the 2 a.m. podcast name come from?
I always get asked this question. So my co-host actually came up with it because really what we're trying to replicate is those late night 2 a.m. conversations with like the best people in your life, friends, family, around a campfire, maybe you're camping, having a good time, those sort of conversations are really attractive. And I think that's really what we're trying to replicate for other people.
Yeah, the deep and meaningful stuff that doesn't get spoken about. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. Well, again, thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and a treat to talk to you, and for our listeners to hear your knowledge. And but I'll make sure that I'll put the links to all those at your website and social media for anybody that wants to get in touch with you. But so for our listeners, thank you so very much for joining us on today's Healthy Shift Worker podcast. Please, if you find this episode helpful, feel free to give us a five-star rating, leave a comment, share this episode far and wide, so that we can get this knowledge out to as more shift workers as we possibly can, to help as many people as possible. So until next time,